and welcome to episode 3 of this series on the life of David Henry White, a free black teenage sailor kidnapped on the high seas during the American Civil War. I'm Andrew Sillen, author of Kidnapped at Sea, the Civil War Voyage of David Henry White. In the last episode, we met White in his hometown of Lewis, Delaware, as he embarked on a new career as an assistant cook aboard the Philadelphia packet ship Tonawanda. In this critical episode, we reached the turning point of his life. His capture, and the moment a free black teenager was transformed, on paper and in historical memory, into a slave. The Tonawanda had been constructed in 1850. She carried no steam power, but it was reliable, skippered by a superbly competent veteran, Captain Theodore Julius. White had only a brief homestand in Philadelphia before the Tonawanda eased down the Delaware toward the open sea on September 30th, 1862. For White, this was an opportunity, not a risk. His first voyage with the Cope Line had gone well, and he had signed on again with the same team at the same pay. 17, he was no longer a landsman. He was a working sailor with a good job as a cook. According to Captain Julius's log, by Thursday, October 9th, the Tonawanda reached latitude 40 degrees north and longitude 50 degrees west, putting the ship roughly 1,000 miles east of Cape May. Since leaving the American coast, it had averaged about 6 knots. At the same moment, another ship was heading west from the Azores on a very different mission. By October 1862, the Confederate commerce raider Alabama was already feared across the Atlantic world. In a matter of days, it had captured an entire New England whaling fleet near the Azores, burning the ships one by one. The losses were substantial, and the shockwaves rippled through New England's maritime community. But that was just the beginning. Semmes now intended to take the war at sea even closer to home. He was bound for New York, where he hoped to strike Union shipping directly at the mouth of the harbor, a move that would have been as psychological as it was destructive. Constructed in Birkenhead, near Liverpool, the Alabama was exceptionally graceful and swift, and was admired even by its enemies. It was 220 feet long, displaced roughly 1,050 tons, and could move under sail or steam, an advantage that allowed her to appear suddenly, pursue relentlessly, and threaten with overwhelming power. Today we would call it a stealth vessel, as its cannons were hidden behind high bulwarks, and it masqueraded as a merchant ship. It had more arms than armor, and more speed than stability. It wasn't designed to fight ships of war head-on. It was designed to hunt and destroy commerce. Semmes liked to keep trophies, and inside his cabin, chronometers taken from burned ships were lined up on shelves. By the end of the voyage, he would collect dozens. And even the ship's wheel carried a message. Cast in bronze was the unofficial motto of the Confederacy, Aide-toi et Dieu t'aidera. God helps those who help themselves. The same motto was engraved on Robert E. Lee's ceremonial sword. This was the ship that intercepted the Tonawanda's path just before sunset on October 9th, 1862. Semmes sent over a boarding party under the command of 26-year-old 4th Lieutenant John Lowe, armed with 2 revolvers. Julius was taken aboard the Alabama, where the captains and crews of 2 previously captured ships, the Wavecrest and the Dunkirk, were already being held in irons. Negotiations followed. Julius offered a ransom. Semmes refused. Semmes couldn't just burn the Tonawanda, however. Unlike the whalers so easily disposed of in the Azores, the Tonawanda had about 70 passengers. At one point, Semmes broke off negotiations to chase another sail. British, as it turned out, before resuming negotiations. What Julius later described as quite a controversy dragged on for 4 days. In the end, Julius was compelled to sign an extorted bond of $80,000, payable only if the Confederacy won the war. Eventually, Captain Julius and the rest of the crew and passengers of the Tonawanda and the Wavecrest and the Dunkirk were all allowed to proceed to Liverpool, with one notable exception. The Tonawanda's first mate, Julius's son, wrote in his log,
"They forced our passenger cook, a Negro boy, to join them and took him on board. His name was Henry White of Lewiston, Delaware."
That sentence matters. It's the only contemporary eyewitness description of White's seizure written by someone who had no incentive to lie. In his later deposition to Congress, Captain Julius described the moment the Alabama released the Tonawanda.
All persons belonging to the Alabama returned to her, with one colored boy, our passenger cook. He belonging to Delaware, a slave state, and being without protection or free papers.
We know that White signed a voluntary labor contract with Cope Lines. His pay was recorded. The service was legal. So why did Semmes describe White as enslaved and force him aboard the Alabama? Semmes' own log and his post-war memoir offer clues. Firstly, news of the Emancipation Proclamation carried in the Tonawanda's mailbags would have enraged him, and no doubt he was aware of the Second Confiscation Act, which had declared that slaves taken by the North, quote, shall be deemed captives of war and shall forever be free, unquote. It seems his logic was, well, if the North is going to take our slaves, then the South will take theirs. But for that logic to work, he needed a slave. The Alabama also had a practical problem. Semmes wrote in his memoir that after 7 weeks at sea, the Confederate officers, who were accustomed to being served by black servants their whole lives, found themselves without anyone to bring hot food to the wardroom. He wrote, quote,
"We were in want of good servants, and sent White to wait on the wardroom mess."
The problem was that the galley was at the other end of the ship from the wardroom. In his October 9th log, on the very day of the kidnapping, Semmes records the original lie about David Henry White.
The prize in company during the night. The master having reported that one of the black waiters on board his ship was a slave from Delaware, had him brought on board and entered as one of the crew, a waiter in the officers' messes.
That claim that White was a slave from Delaware was a lie, and there's no way that Captain Julius would have described him that way. It did not appear in the Tonawanda's contracts, its manifests, or its logs. It appears here for the first time in Semmes' hand. The moment the Tonawanda reached Liverpool, Captain Julius reported the kidnapping. We know this because Benjamin Moran, who served as Assistant Secretary to U.S. Ambassador to England, Charles Francis Adams, recorded it in his diary on October 31st, 1862.
We have a written statement from Captain Julius of the Tonawanda, through the consul at Liverpool. The captain says the pirates number about 100, nearly all of whom are English man-o'-war's men. Semmes stole a free Negro boy from the ship and will no doubt carry him into slavery.
Consider what White had just experienced. If he was like any other free black from Sussex County, Delaware, or for that matter, any other black sailor before the war, he had spent much of his life in fear of being kidnapped. He would have understood the danger of kidnapping and no doubt asserted his free status. But all we have of this moment is Semmes' account years later, which was presumably something of an understatement. The boy, he wrote, was a little alarmed. Within weeks, the news crossed the Atlantic. The Philadelphia Ledger reported White's seizure on November 14th, and then it was picked up by the New York Times and the New York Herald, where the headline read, "The Pirate Steals a Colored Boy from the Tonawanda." And then, nothing. There were no rallies, no speeches, no family interviews, no campaign to recover him. With the exception of 2 muster rolls, White disappears from the primary documentary record, although his appropriated life survived in numerous secondary accounts. After the war, Britain paid the United States $15.5 million in reparations to the Alabama Claims Arbitration, the first international tribunal of its kind and an astounding sum in its day. White was mentioned, but his family was not compensated. His kidnapping was not redressed. His life was never considered. In the next episode, we'll follow White aboard the Alabama and begin to appreciate what he actually experienced in over 600 days of captivity. If you agree that this story is important and worthy of a larger audience, please hit like and subscribe.